we are in America tonight, and everybody's still trying to make sense of what happened, and you can't really make sense of what happened in Florida at the airport in Fort Lauderdale. I had a friend who was affected by it and had luggage strewn all over the place, but feels lucky that that was what it was all about. It took her an extra day and a half to get home. Sadly, too many lost their lives and others were injured, and now this Florida airport shooting suspect is going to be in a federal court. So the 26-year-old, what we know is he was an Iraq war veteran, and of course he's accused of killing those 5 people in Fort Lauderdale at a very busy airport, and it's the latest in what we unfortunately see as some people are terming it a gun rampage. And again, he's due in court. Esteban Santiago is his name. He had a history of erratic behavior, and he has admitted to investigators that he had planned out Friday's attack in Fort Lauderdale, bought a one-way ticket from his home in Alaska to carry it out. And that's what we do know. They haven't ruled out terrorism as a motive, and they're investigating whether mental illness played a role. Clearly, I think he was absolutely not right. She's been on the show before. Michele Byington joins us from U.S. Law Shield. Michele, thanks so much for popping on the show.
Thank you.
So, you know, whenever this happens, what it starts to ignite is this idea of guns, access to guns. Oh, if that wasn't possible, would that have happened, et cetera, et cetera. So you respond to those kinds of things. What do you say to that when you hear that kind of conversation?
Well, what's to stop this individual from just getting into a car and running into a crowded festival and killing 5? Or what's to stop him from grabbing a knife and stabbing 5 people to death? At the end of the day, there are 5 people dead, and he chose to use a firearm that he was in lawful possession of. However, if it wouldn't have been a gun, it would have been something else.
Yeah, you know, I agree with you on that. If it wasn't a gun, it would have been something else if he was so intent on doing that. But one thing it clearly, and as you said, it was lawful. Here's the gray area about mental illness and waiting periods and would someone know. But I think it's so difficult to know that for sure if somebody's mentally ill. Is there a history? Is there a record? What are people saying? Because, you know, that's another part of what the discussion is.
Absolutely. So someone who is adjudicated as mentally defective cannot possess and purchase firearms. Now, that takes going in front of a judge and a judge declaring you as mentally incompetent. And before that happens, there are many steps and many processes and procedures that have to take place in order to take someone's rights away because the government says that you shouldn't have them. And it sounds like this individual was at those sort of beginning stages where he was going and talking to the police. He was committed. My question is, was he involuntarily committed or was he voluntarily committed? Because there's a difference there as well when it comes to your legal rights. But we all go through the same sort of due process before we lose our rights. And it sounds like this individual was probably on his way to having his rights taken away, but unfortunately he decided to act before the state could get that accomplished.
Yeah, so as somebody who regularly advises lobbyists and whatnot on firearms and self-defense issues, what is the thing that you think is the most challenging in your role, or what do you see as the U.S. Law Shield program continues?
Well, the hardest thing is the emotional argument, because any time, I mean, if you saw that surveillance video, it was
awful,
horrifying. And then, of course, there was also some video that was taken by somebody's iPhone where you could see these people who were on the floor bleeding out. So when you see those images, it just makes your heart sink to your stomach. And that's the hardest thing to overcome for the gun lobby, are these compelling emotional arguments. However, the response to that is, yes, it's horrific what happened. However, we need to look at facts, we need to look at statistics, and we need to look to people's rights. And we can't legislate based on people's emotion. We need to legislate based on facts.
Yeah, that's well said. Based on facts, absolutely. Where do you see a lot of these? See, I see the arguments never stop, obviously. That's why you have the position you have, and there's all these conversations. What do you think is the next frontier? I mean, in self-defense, again, I think there's not enough of the stories out there, frankly, of people who have been able to save lives in situations that are horrifying.
You're right, and it's frustrating for somebody who is a gun owner, and I represent gun owners daily. It's frustrating to see on the media how demonized the firearm is when I see every day how it does save lives and how it does deter crime. And so it really is a challenge to get sort of that narrative out there against the anti-gun crowd that, you know what, there was a grandmother who had her home broken into, and but for having a firearm, God knows what would have happened to her, right? She was able to defend herself in her home because of that firearm. But you just don't hear of those stories out on the media because it doesn't further the liberal agenda.
Yeah, and now we're seeing a changing of the guard in D.C. What's the thought there? There has to be some conversations about that, I would assume, because now you've got a Republican and Donald Trump coming into the White House, and he's talked about gun ownership.
Yeah, I believe most Americans, with regard to their Second Amendment rights, don't feel like Trump is going to attack them. He has come out and blatantly said that he is not going to attack gun rights whatsoever. And the NRA has come out with, in which Trump agreed, with national reciprocity for handgun licenses, which I think is a fantastic idea. And so we're no longer going to see that sort of pressure or that fear that many people may feel because you hear of Obama demonizing the firearm or, Nancy Pelosi demonizing the firearm anymore, and they don't have the majority control that they did have. And so I think a lot more people may be more comfortable with perhaps using their firearm, being proud to say they're a gun owner because, we've got this Republican swing right now on the federal level.
Yeah. Boy, interesting stuff. All right. Thanks so much, as always, for lending your insight to us here on America Tonight.
Thank you.
All right. A little more on the story about Santiago. Santiago, of course, is going to be asked if he understands the charges that face him during the hearing. Here's the thing about this. Bond will be set at the Broward County Jail in Fort Lauderdale. Now, here's what's interesting to me. He could face the death penalty if convicted on charges of carrying out violence at an airport, using a firearm during a violent act, and killing with a firearm. But it might be months before prosecutors reveal what actually happens in his future. They've got a couple of weeks to indict him. Then they have to go through the whole death penalty review, all of that. Executions, so you know, have been on hold in Florida since the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the state's death penalty laws a year ago. The Florida Supreme Court overturned a rewritten version of it, I guess, in October. 6 people had gunshot wounds from the attack. About 3 dozen suffered minor injuries in the chaos. Passengers, airport workers fled the gunfire. And they say Santiago arrived on a connecting flight, as I mentioned before, from Alaska, got a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, so you understand what's happening here, from his checked luggage before he loaded it in a bathroom. Horrific. He then jumped back to the baggage claim area, walked while shooting in a very methodical manner, as they say, 10 to 15 times, aiming at his victims' heads, according to the criminal complaint. Information, of course, surfaced just in the last day or two that police in Alaska took a handgun from Santiago in November after he told FBI agents there that his mind was being controlled by a U.S. intelligence agency. Not good. They returned it to him about a month later after a medical evaluation found he wasn't mentally ill. So now there's going to be people very sad by what they let happen or fall loose or were duped or whatever. So you know a little bit about his record. He served from 2007 to 2016 in the Puerto Rico and Alaska National Guard. He was deployed, as I mentioned before, to Iraq from 2010 to 2011. The Pentagon released all that information. And his relatives said, listen, he was acting erratically since he returned from Iraq. And boy, that video that was pushed out, I think I saw it on TMZ, showed him walking calmly past the luggage carousels, before he just pulled the handgun from his waistband and started shooting people who fled or dived to the floor. It was one of those horrible things where it's a mass shooting. People are calmly getting luggage, happy, some of them celebrating, doing whatever, and then they're left to question, how could this happen? Why did this happen? All of those questions, and I think there's going to be a lot of questions that surface around them taking the gun from him, but then him getting it back. Oof. Hang with us. Much more coming your way next on America Tonight.